Hi, everyone. Happy afternoon. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the What CFOs and Boards Need from HR in 2026 webinar and what they're not saying out loud. I first want to again welcome you here today, and I'd also like to let you know that the session today is available for HRCI, SHRM, and ATD professional development credits. I want to make sure that you guys know that so you can get your credits in should that apply to you. Today, we're going to take a look at how boards and CFOs are actually, evaluating their investments in people and how they're doing that in 2026 and how HR, right, the very notable department, can close that credibility gap. Okay. So, again, welcome. My name is Dr. Marline C. Duroseau. I am the Managing Director of HR and Leadership Development here at Brandon Hall Group. I am also a former CFO, and having that dual lens is exactly why today's conversation exists. Okay. This session is not necessarily about HR trends. It's more translating. How do we talk about CFOs and boards and actually evaluating people investments in 2026? What they say publicly, what do they debate in private, and what ultimately determines whether or not an HR initiative that's presented, what determines, what initiative gets funded, what gets delayed, or what they shelve quietly, because sometimes that happens too. So my goal is to help you close what I call the credibility gap. And that's the space between strong people strategy and financial decision making. So, it's very important. And as a former CFO, I've toted the line each time with this topic. So excited to get into that today. So before we continue, I'd like to talk a little bit more about Brandon Hall Group. For those of you who may not necessarily be familiar, there are many ways in which you can, collaborate, partner, and work with Brandon Hall. We can participate in the Excellence Awards. That's this screen slide on the screen here, so you can also follow along. We have the HCM Excellence Awards. We have Excellence in Technology and Ed Technology, Excellence in Action. And each year we have the HCM Excellence Conference, which just got concluded about 2 weeks ago for 2026. And I have to tell you, for those of you that were there, you already know it was amazing. So the next one is coming up in 2027 with the dates there, January 26th, 27th, and 28th of 2027. We also have brick events that are happening here in South Florida, the AI in HR Summit, which is slated for October 15th, 2026, and the Leadership Summit slated for November 17th and 18th of 2026. And then, of course, last but not least, you can definitely stay engaged and gain a lot of value from our institute, the Brandon Hall Institute, where you get unlimited access to research, insights that cover all of the areas, including HR, talent, learning, and also be able to get world-class certifications, take different courses, collaborate with over 300 renowned HCM experts. So Institute is something that you definitely should look into because it's very, very beneficial and can help your company as well. And lastly, before we get started, just a reminder, because sometimes I know it may be a little bit unclear, the chat is open. So any questions or comments that you would like to make, definitely put them in the chat. Most of the time, it'll be something that I'll definitely be able to answer for you. If not, at least it will be noted, and then we'll definitely get back to you. But the chat is open, and we want to know what you're thinking, so don't be afraid to use it. Okay, so here is what we are here to talk about today, the quiet disconnect, right? HR is talking about transformation. That is a theme that I think will never get old when it comes to HR. So HR wants transformation because that's what's important, obviously. But the CFOs are asking, okay, well, what's the return on this transformation? And what is the risk if we don't act or fund this initiative that is looking for transformation? And here in my data anchor box here, and by the way, all of our data is courtesy of our own Brandon Hall research from award-winning case studies with our companies and research that we make. So we found that 80% of organizations say that leadership and workforce strategies must change significantly, but many of them still struggle to demonstrate the business impact, right? And that disconnect lies in how is the value framed, right? So HR is talking again, transformation, future skills, culture, leadership pipelines, well-being, whereas the CFOs and the board members are asking something a little bit more blunt, right? They're like, what is this? And why do we have to do it? So it's important that CFOs are not philosophically opposed, right, to people investments. In fact, many CFOs support them. The disconnect here isn't about believing in the initiative, it's about framing it. How do we present it? How do we frame it so that, we know where the value lies? So HR often leads with activity and intention, whereas CFOs from a strategic high-level financial overview aspect, they lead with exposure. How does this expose the company? What productivity will this improve or create? And sustainability, right? And in addition to that, what are the trade-offs if we invest in this? So until these type of languages come in alignment, even good initiatives may end up stalling, okay? So that's the disconnect there, talking value in addition to just action and activity. And with that, we're going to get a little bit of take the temperature of the room here. We have our first polling question, right? When HR initiatives struggle to gain executive buy-in, what's the most common reason you see for that happening? Love to hear your thoughts here. I'll give about a 30 to 45 seconds up to a minute here. Okay, so our results here, we see that when HR initiatives struggle to gain executive buy-in, what's the most common reason you see? And many of you have responded in the majority that ROI isn't clear or credible enough. And absolutely, and that aligns with the research that we found where 80% of companies, are finding the same thing. So this definitely matches to what we're seeing. So it is an issue that exists, right, in the industries out here. Thank you for your participation in that. And so what exactly are CFOs and executive boards optimizing for? Some of the CFO decision filters in 2026, based on all of the changes and all of the data and different metrics that we're seeing coming in, they involve risk, right? What is the operational risk? Talent, reputational. Other decision filters involve productivity and capacity, right? How would we be able to increase productivity? And also, can we increase capacity? And all of this ties back into overall business outcome. So I also want to make sure we remember that as well. Another decision filter is time to impact. How much time is this going to take? Well, we have to do 2 and 3 iterations of this initiative, which means more money to spend and get it going. So how much time is it going to take? Scalability. Okay, so we implement this new initiative, we fund it, it's done. Are we able to scale it in order to get the employees, right, on a greater scale in terms of their skills, their knowledge, their development, which then turns into business impact and business income? Or is it just something that's for now to make sure that the company can sustain what it has? And also you have the sustainability of the spend. I just mentioned that too with the scalability. So those are some of the decision filters that we're seeing in 2026. And when CFOs and the boards evaluate these HR initiatives, they want to make specific decisions based on a specific lens that they're looking through. So, more than half of the organizations are now using AI, right, in performance and development decisions. That's our data anchor here, also from our Brandon Hall research. So because CFOs and companies are using more AI in performance and development, it tells us something critical is happening. Okay, so the CFOs are no longer asking if work will change, they're asking how fast, right? The time to impact, and whether leadership and talent systems can keep up. You see, so how fast is this happening and can everybody keep up? So because of that, HR investments are no longer viewed just as programs, right? There's a different lens you're looking at it through. I'm not funding this because we need to add another program. Oftentimes you don't need another program, right? Their infrastructure is expected. They want to evaluate it as an infrastructure. How will this go in and further support the business income and the business strategy, right? So it's no longer viewed as programs. They're being viewed as infrastructures, and infrastructures are expected to perform. Okay. So what are some of the common pitfalls that CFOs see? Why, HR business cases miss the mark? What happens? Why is that a situation, right? So from a CFO seat, there are a few reasons why HR business cases sometimes fall short. Firstly, like we agreed as well on that first polling question, the ROI to a certain extent is introduced too late or not at all, right? Because we're looking at it as we need to fund a program. We need to get this activity going because it's required. But then what is the ROI? We have to think about that definitely even before everything is done, or definitely right when it's being done. So it's, you have to introduce the ROI not late. You want to do it on time. Okay. Secondly, why some things fall short or, don't get picked up for funding when it relates to HR initiatives is that the metrics are focused on completion and not contribution, right? There's one thing to say, okay, we just want to pay this money so that we can check off the box that this training happened, this in-service happened, this program was started, but how is it contributing to the overall success of the company? How is it contributing to the overall success of the company's clients? How is it contributing to, and will it be long lasting for the employees that work there? Right? So it's very, very important to make sure that the metrics are focused on contribution in addition to just being completed. Next, thirdly, the benefits are described emotionally and not economically. And this is where the CFOs kind of sort of, okay, the HR initiatives gets lost in the sauce. Because when you're approaching the board members, when you're approaching the executives, namely the CFO, you have where your chief people officers, your chief human resource officers, they're coming in from, and it's not a bad thing, an emotional aspect, or even the people that work in those departments, because we want what really matters, which is the people to be happy, to be, upskilled, to be developed. We want them to be very much capable of sustaining, what they've learned and helping the business. And a lot of times that comes from working with them every day, seeing how hard they work, all the things that we would deem emotional. Whereas by the time it gets to the board and the CFO, what is described from an emotional standpoint and not economic. The boards and the CFO are looking through a different lens, and that lens is economy. Not that the other ones don't matter, but if we want that initiative and that infrastructure to be implemented and funded, we have to also talk the economic aspect of it. And fourth, there's no baseline or counterfactual, right? No way to answer compared to what. So if we don't do it, or if we do it, what are we comparing it to, right? There's no baseline. We just want the money to get funded because X. So we want to be able to make that business case to be able to say, okay, what are we comparing this to? So even, among award-winning organizations, only about 2/3, right, 67% of companies consistently use ROI to secure continued investment. So CFOs, we're not looking for perfection. They're looking for directional, confidence, right? Because that's a big number that only 67%, only 2/3 of even award-winning organizations currently use ROI. And it's important to note that a lot of times what erodes that credibility that CFOs are looking for, it's not that the measurement was imperfect, it's measurement that feels a bit, retroactive or defensive instead of being designed from the start. You want to design it with the end in mind, knowing what you're going to gain economically, sustainability, capacity expansion, things of that nature. Okay. So, this is information that, is very, very empowering. Knowing what you're going to get in terms of, or what you're aiming for the ROI helps you to frame that discussion so that when you do present to the board of the CFOs, you have a better stance of getting the funding that you need. So let's talk a little bit about what CFOs are not saying out loud, right? So there are some unspoken boardroom questions that we talked about a little bit in the intro there. What happens if we don't invest, right? These questions, sometimes they don't appear in the HR meetings, but they dominate the conversations in the boardroom. What happens if we don't invest? What's the other side of that? You got to make that use case. Okay. Where is human judgment, right, remaining non-negotiable? Because even though there's an inception of AI, we still have to make sure we incorporate and be mindful of the human aspect of things. Another question that's unspoken, are we developing leaders too fast? Sorry, are we developing leaders fast enough for disruption? Okay, what's our rate there? Because quite frankly, this word disruption is not going to go away, because if it's not one type of disruption, there's something else. And to me, especially for the sake of this conversation, disruption is synonymous to change. There's constant change, constant disruption. So is what we're doing, these investments that we're trying to fund, these HR initiatives, these infrastructures that we want to implement, will doing so build our leaders fast enough to be able to deal with the disruption that is almost inevitable? Okay, and then, next we have, will this lower future costs or will it add to it? And that's always something to be mindful of, because at the end of the day, the board members and the chief financial officers, those roles are also there to maximize shareholder equity and make sure that the shareholders are happy. And it's one of those things that in order for them to get a return on their investment, we also have to think about costs. So will this lower the future costs or add to it? So, with skills half-life shrinking, competitive advantage now comes from speed, right, of capability development and not just having static talent, right? So let me repeat that. With skills half-life or shrinking, competitive advantage now comes from speed of capability and being able to develop people quickly, right? And not just develop them and check off the box that it was done. They're developed, they're able to maintain, sustain, and actually learn and grow from the skill that they have developed or the leadership that they've developed, and have the capability to keep going and implement it in time of disruption. Not just, okay, well, we have static talent and everybody's talented and so they should be fine. No, that's the having that competitive advantage there with being able to have speed in capability development of your talent. Okay. So CFOs think in second order consequences. Like I was mentioning, they are paid to anticipate what breaks later, what's going to happen. Will this lower my future costs or will it add to it? Again, back to the money talk. So that's why HR proposals, they must answer the fundamental question of, what risk does this reduce or prevent? That's a big question that CFOs needs from HR. What risk does this reduce or prevent? Investing in this initiative, investing in this infrastructure, investing in this type of program or upskilling and different things that we need for our employees. What risk does this reduce or prevent? Okay, with that, we've been going for a few minutes here. We have our second polling question. Poll question number 2, which factor most influences executive decisions about people investments today? You can go ahead and choose one. Which factor most influences executive decisions about people investments today? What have you been seeing in your organizations? Risk mitigation, productivity and capacity, cost control and budget predictability, or long-term capability and readiness? I would love to know what you think. All right. Okay. All right. So it looks like our results here are cost control and budget predictability. Yes. So you see, everything that we're talking about is aligning with what majority of people are seeing in their businesses today. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Reframing HR initiatives for financial leaders. Okay, we have to shift the narrative. This is where the translation matters most, right? So in order to resonate with our financial leaders, HR must shift the narrative. And what are we shifting the narrative from and to? First, you're shifting it from engagement to execution capacity. Okay, being engaged in something, right? Okay, well, we need to get the money so that we can do it so that they can do this. Okay, well, then how does that impact your execution capacity? Are we able to execute? And at what capacity? Another narrative to shift is going from learning hours to time to productivity, right? You see how we just shifted that? So yes, you may still need the learning hours, but we're not talking about learning hours because a lot of times when that's coming, it's like, okay, more hours times rate. That's more payroll. Okay, and it's so funny that we mentioned the payroll. I started off in payroll in my financial career as well. So when you're going to learning hours, it's like, okay, more money that we have to pay for payroll versus framing it as, okay, these are needed because it's time to productivity. This is time that we're going to spend, which will give us ultimate or lead to ultimately more productivity. Okay, from well-being to sustainability of performance, and from culture to decision quality. So Brandon Hall Group research shows that psychological safety and connection are now leading indicators of productivity and retention, not soft outcomes. So in other words, trust and belonging are no longer value statements. They are definitely needed as operational variables. And CFOs don't respond to leading indicators. CFOs do respond to leading indicators when we show them clearly. So we have to shift that narrative. Question here from Erwin. Why do HR issues belong with the CEO and not the CFO? Great question, Erwin. And that's what we're trying to, and that's why these conversations are important and are happening, because now we're bringing in the CFO to these type of discussions, because a lot of the times, yes, the CEO ultimately wants everything to run well and happen, but the money decision stays with the CFO. So people have to convince the CFO so that the initiatives can be funded so that the CEO can get the different results that they need to. So that's a great question. And that's kind of sort of why things are shifting a bit and having that conversation align with CFO and HR more than in the past, having that, interconnection between the two. Great question. All right, human leadership in an AI augmented organization. So as AI optimizes speed and scale, human leadership must optimize something different, right? That includes judgment, ethics, trust, meaning. And our research shows that AI adoption accelerates human capabilities like empathy, critical thinking, ethical decision making, right? Those are increasing in value, not declining, right? So let's repeat that a little bit. The Brandon Hall Research Group shows that human capabilities like empathy, critical thinking, ethical judgment are increasing in value as AI adoption accelerates. Okay, they're not declining. So CFOs don't fear AI replacing the leaders. They fear leaders who can't decide when not to follow AI. That's where that judgment and the ethics and all that comes into play. So this is where HR plays, a decisive role in being able to safeguard decision quality. Okay. So when HR metrics, land well with boards and CFOs, so when they do what they need to do, when they're received by the executive team, they usually answer one of the 5 questions. Okay. How quickly are people becoming productive? There's that word again, productivity, right? Return on investment in the form of productivity. Are errors and rework declining? And that's important. Do we have leadership depth where it matters the most? What is our attrition risk in the critical roles? And how fast and how well are decisions being made? So, high performing organizations, they now use different dashboards that are tied directly to business outcomes, kind of what I was talking about in the morning, earlier in the presentation. So, the high performing organizations, they use those dashboards that are tied to business outcomes, not just HR outputs. Okay. And here's an important practice shift. You want to partner HR, you want to partner with finance early, not after the rollout, not after any resistance. You want to do it early because at that point you are already thinking with the business outcome in mind, which is also one of the things that the executive boards always want to consider. And what must, HR start doing differently in 2026? To stay credible, back to that word again, in 2026, HR must make 3 strategic shifts. First, you want to design measurement before programs launch. You're starting with the end in mind. So before programs launch, you already have your measurement intact. Second, you want to treat leadership as infrastructure and not just events or not just programs. It's an infrastructure. You're building the foundation. You're bettering the foundation. Third, you want to translate empathy into operational strength. And that empathy is very important because with the advent and use of AI, you want that human aspect, which also brings empathy into it. And it's not just a soft skill, it is an operational strength. So organizations, that succeed, they treat leadership development as a continuous ecosystem, not just a one-off. Empathy is no longer a soft skill. Like I mentioned, it's how organizations preserve their decision quality when they're under pressure. And why a lot of times are they under pressure? The change and the disruption that's happening. So you need that empathy in order to preserve decision making. Okay. So, your role at the leadership table. This brings us to HR's next evolution, right? You're going from a program owner to an enterprise risk and capability architect. Don't we like how that sounds? You're no longer just a HR programs person. You're not a program owner. You're an enterprise business risk and capability architect. So CFOs want HR at the table. And when HR speaks the language of impact, right, that's where the credibility is built because they have clarity, not just throwing out a whole bunch of complex things and explaining why it'll work. You want to speak the language of impact. and build that credibility. Okay. Next, we have our last polling question. And thank you for hanging in there with us. Just about done. How confident are you that your current HR metrics resonate with CFOs and boards? It's $1 million question. How confident are you that your current HR metrics resonate with the CFOs and the board members? Okay, let's see. Somewhat confidence, making progress, but room to improve. Okay, I like it. I like it. And many of you are in agreement with that. And that is one of those things that talks to Erwin's question, right? And how I answered that we need to be more aligned with syncing HR and the chief financial officer role as well. Okay, all right. Okay, so some key takeaways here. There are 4 things I want you to remember. CFOs fund clarity, not passion. We're all passionate, but we got to be clear about what that passion is going to yield. Measurement is a design choice, not a reporting task. We don't want to just report numbers just to report. How are we designing the programs that are allowing us to measure this impact in the right way? Human leadership is appreciating, not depreciating in the AI era. And finally, HR credibility equals business fluency and human insight. We can't forget about the business fluency and, of course, the human insight. So if HR can translate people strategy into enterprise value, that gap, right, that credibility gap, it disappears. Okay, so I want to thank you all for your time today. And, thank you for the work that you do and are doing in shaping the organizations that not only perform, but endure, and just like we have here, definitely visit us online, brandonhall.com, and you'll receive a copy of the PDF of the presentation and a link within the next 24 hours. So if there's anything Brandon Hall can do, definitely reach out to us, because we're also working on that specific ROI tool as the former CFO and now Managing Director of HR and Leadership Development. We are equipped to help you. So thank you so much for your time. You're welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. See you next time.